this is James Unger, Digital Innovation, JCPS, coming back with our second episode of Minecraft Education Edition. Today we're going to be looking at the settings and what you can and should not probably mess with in the settings section when you're first getting started. First of all, probably the easiest thing, your little character here, you can change them, what they look like. There's these skin packs. And you can go through, choose who you'd like your character to look like in the world. And I kind of prefer this guy in the little creeper hoodie from the Halloween pack. Now, in the outside settings out here, a lot of this is for your UI or user interface. And I would recommend not messing with really any of these. There's not much need to. The only one I actually adjust is the music volume for the background music to turn it down. And I just cut it about in half. You can take it all the way down if you like, wherever you're happy with it. But I wouldn't mess with any of these other ones. They can change your layout for your keyboards and whatnot. Now, if you have some students that need that changed, you can go ahead and do that. But I would recommend not doing it that way. Everybody's on the same page and everybody's learning the same way. Your main settings you're going to be dealing with is when you're doing a world, whether that's you create one, you're uploading one, you're going to have all the settings in here. So on this side, you have two options, which is play and host. Typically, if you're running it this way, you'll be hosting, and then your students will be playing, and they'll be joining your hosted world. Obviously, world name, fairly easy. Call it whatever you'd like, something you're going to remember. Default game mode, you have survival and you have creative. Your difficulty, you have peaceful, easy, normal, hard. Generally, that's going to be set to peaceful. Not damage not being done, things like that. Easy puts it to a low amount of damage. Normal is the basic level, and hard just increases damage done by outside creatures and things like that. So permission level for students who join your world. Now you can have visitor, member, or operator. Operator, basically you're giving them the same amount of permissions that you have. I wouldn't recommend that or know why you would do that. Visitor, they can come in, but they cannot really do anything in your world. It's kind of like walking through the zoo, but you can't touch or turn anything on or off. You can push no buttons. Member is the one that it defaults to. It's basically your science center. You go in, you can do things, work with the world, but there is somebody in charge of you. You're there as a chaperone. All right, so world type. This is pretty important. So you've got three world types. You've got flat, infinite, and old. Now it defaults to infinite, which literally means infinite. You can fly in any direction, just keep going. It will just keep generating world randomly. And that is where you have your terrain and your trees and mountains and caves and water features. Different biomes will show up, some desert, some snow. Old is similar to infinite, except with old, what it does is it puts restrictions on the size of the world. So if you have older machines, it will not affect them as much. Not really needed, but it can restrict the area that you're in. Flat is a good one when you're doing builds or things like that you have students doing like challenge type things. What Flat World does is it makes exactly a flat world. It is nothing but green grass for as long as you can see. And it's completely flat, so there's no terrain. It makes it very good for building. Seed, you can type in some different codes here on your infinite worlds, and it will spawn or produce different areas, different lands. Those are codes that you can look up, things you can search for. Generally, you will not be messing with that. Simulation distance defaults to 6 chunks. You can see that's in the middle. Really, all that is doing is, once again, you can vary that depending on your machines. The lower you turn that down to 4, it's going to, when you're in the world and you're looking around, it's how far you can see. How far will the computer have to render? So it generally goes to 6. You can up it to 8. I would just leave it where it's at unless you run into issues. I've never had anybody need to turn that down. Then you start getting into your world options, and show coordinates can be used. A lot of people don't use it. It can be a handy tool that if you're not running the classroom add-on, you can have the coordinates on. It'll show players and yourself what exact coordinates you're at with XYZ. You can use that when you're building or setting up a world if you're wanting to know the exact count of blocks you've moved, if you're creating a certain area. But anyway, so it shows your coordinates. Immediate respawn is just that. It doesn't prompt you or ask you. It just, as soon as you would happen to die or be removed from the server, it'll pop you right back on there instead of asking. Cheats. Now, I know that sounds bad because we see cheats and we think, oh my goodness. So activate cheats. You generally want to leave that on because what that does is it allows you to use the what's called slash commands, which is just a command that starts with a / and then you type in like /WB will give you world builder access, or you can turn that off. So having that on is very good for you. People that come into your world will not be able to do that. We'll talk about that later. Code builder defaults to on. You may or may not be using that, but what it does is it allows them to activate what's called the agent. It's a little robot guy that pops up, and you can give him code through Minecraft, or you can actually import Tinker code, and he will execute whatever you've given him to do. A set of routines, building a certain structure, you can code him to do other things. If you turn that off, then agent will not show up and you cannot do coding. Generally it defaults to on. You just don't activate him in the game and he won't show up. Always day is actually pretty handy. I generally turn that on because if not, it runs through, I think it's every 20 minutes is a day. So it'll turn daytime, nighttime, and as long as you're in peaceful mode, creative mode, the nothing will spawn anyways. But generally, if you're in survival or you're in easy through hard, at night, mobs or monsters will spawn. So I keep it to always day for one. Random tick speed, you do not really need to mess with this. Just leave that where it's at. What that does is it speeds up or slows down the time of day clock, which isn't really needed, I guess, unless you wanted to set up a world that ran at our actual time, and then you can look that up and put in the normal time for that. But that's not usually used in most worlds. Just leave that set to where it is. Now, there's this extra button, because you'll notice I've scrolled all the way down and it stops. But the really good settings for the EDU version are down here, and you have to turn on Show Classroom Settings. So now you'll see I can scroll down. I have even further options. Perfect weather is great, depending on what you're doing. You may want to, science teachers may want that on for some of their biomes, but perfect weather on keeps it nice and sunny while it's during the day. It won't rain, it won't snow, you won't get any fog effects, anything like that that you can get with weather being on. Allow mobs. Mobs is simply a shortened term for mobile, anything mobile, and it has come to be known as anything mobile that will attack you or hurt you. So allow mobs is on, but once again, since we're all the way up here, we're in creative peaceful mode. Nothing can hurt us anyway, so you could turn that off just so nothing generates, but you may want to keep that on so that you can get horses and cows and pigs and dogs or wolves and whatnot. Generally, we leave that on. Allow destructive items. This is great to turn off in case you have a student who likes to throw a TNT around, because there are TNT blocks that will destroy buildings. They will damage other players. So you can just go ahead and turn off destructive items. Or you can leave it on. Up to you. Player damage. This is a great one along with player versus player damage down here, PvP. Player damage negates all player damage, whether it's falling, being attacked from a mob. If those are on, you can turn off player damage so they're not hurt in any way. So if we leave that on for normal damage, so you're doing something where you're wanting them to survive, you're doing the Jamestown challenge, you want player damage on, but you don't want, think of releasing 30 kids into the hallway at once. Of course, a couple of guys are going to start hitting each other, doing whatnot. That'd be your player versus player damage in the game world, because they will start hitting each other. So really quickly, to get rid of that and make sure that nobody's hurting each other, you can turn player versus player damage off, and they can swing at each other and it will do absolutely nothing. And it ends that behavior pretty quickly. Now this is the fun one right here, immutable world. You generally do not want to turn that on, because if you have a mutable world on, what it does is it allows people to enter the world, but they can do, once again, absolutely nothing in that world, unless you use what's called an allow block. And we talked about that in our first episode, and we'll get more into that later when we actually start looking at some of these blocks in the game. But a mutable world, nothing is there. It's like going in and you can look at it. It's a museum, don't touch. You just walk around and look at all the pretty things that are made. Generally, you will not use that. All right, so we're going to leave that off because we do want people to interact. So that covers, I do believe, all of our options over here. Resource packs, behavior packs, do not need to worry about that. Play and host, we'll talk about that. Edit settings for game, that's what we just went through. I think that's about it. If you have any questions, you can post them under the video. If not, I will talk to you guys later as we move deeper into Minecraft.